Halo Season 2, Episode 2 came out, along with Episode 1, which I absolutely hated. I go into reasons why the story doesn't stand on its own, and how they don't understand the lore and all the changes that has for the show, even though they keep trying to use surface level things to make it feel like Halo. This episode is right back to the same shit we got last season. We'll get some time with Quan, some time with Soren's wife, a little bit of time with Silver Team. Overall, it's boring, and I don't really think it makes any sense yet again. So let's get into it. We start with Halsey, and I guess the producers and writers just assumed that everyone forgot how last season ended. So I'll remind you. Last season ended for Halsey with her creating a Flash clone that got trapped and interrogated while she escaped. The season ended with her on a different planet. She had flown away to do research, and she wanted to figure out more about Halo. They do a 6-month time jump between seasons, and now Halsey, we're going to see in this episode, is in jail in the Oni facility right near where they were testing the Forerunner artifact from last season. So what you're seeing here is she's trying to figure out where she is and who's in control, and they keep sending in this little girl as Flash clones to play games with her, and then if Halsey has too many questions, the girl dies. And this keeps happening over and over. So this makes no sense for the show, because we already saw Halsey escape. It would have been nice to see a scene of them capturing her. She's one of the smartest people in the Halo universe, and she had already escaped. So the fact that they called her after the fact of her escape should have been on screen. I have no clue why it wasn't. And I'm not even sure what the point in capturing her like this is. For the show, they have her captured. And what you're going to find out later is it kind of seems like Akerson just wants to torture her. They're not really getting anything from it, which is just stupid from one of your best resources. And this is another thing that straight from the lore would have been better. In the lore, when Perez finally catches up to Halsey in the Kilo 5 trilogy, Halsey gets arrested, and she's put in a black site Oni prison cell. And they let her do research. And Perez says, "You're going to work for me, and I'm going to get everything I can out of you, or I'll kill you." And that's the dynamic. Here, it doesn't really seem like they're going that route. It seems like they just want to make Akerson seem even more evil, even though he's clearly supposed to be already evil, or at least the antagonist, if not necessarily completely evil. After that kind of time-wasting scene, we go to Kai and Riz is injured. It's not clear to me why. She did get pretty messed up in the season finale from last year, but John was literally dead, and he's fine. And last season, Kai got shot over and over at point-blank range when her shields were depleted, and she came back pretty shortly after. So I don't know exactly what this injury is. They make it seem like it's a mental thing, but they show her wincing in physical pain, so it's kind of unclear to me what they're doing with this. Obviously, in the show, it doesn't really make much sense because they don't explain anything. And lore-wise, the Spartans heal super fast, and they have a really high pain threshold, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal anyway. If you ever read the books, like there's a part where I think it's James fights after getting one of his arms blown off. They don't worry about like blowing out their Achilles and breaking half their rib cage. Like they fight through everything. I don't really understand this whole plot line, and it's not explained. And this next scene is kind of where the show really starts to feel like a different show wearing a Halo skin. Kai is asking John how he's doing mentally because of Cortana and everything. And he explains that he saw Makee when he was on Sanctuary. And you think, oh, maybe it's a hallucination. But then at the end of this episode, she shows up again. Make of that what you will. It seems like she's not dead, or there's more than one of her. And Kai is saying, I'm the one who shot her. I know she's dead. And John's like, I know she's dead. So this is just kind of off the rails. Unless they really are going to try to do something where John is the unreliable narrator at the end, which I can't imagine they would do in a show like this, but who knows. I thought episode 1 was bad, and to me episode 2 makes the season worse than it already was. And the show just continues to suck ass. Again, we get world building that makes absolutely no sense. They have this kid updating their board of where the different Spartan teams are, and he's using physical signs to update this status board, as if everything wouldn't be digital and linked to computers 500 years in the future. Everything else they do is high tech. We have interstellar technology, and they're using handmade signs put up on a wall to update the status of the Spartans, which are their most top secret and most valuable resource, which they've said in the show. So this again is just completely retarded. I have no idea why they did it, other than they want this scene to exist. So John sees that Cobalt is put on standby, and they're kind of missing, and he's giving this kid a hard time, even though the kid doesn't know anything. He just puts the signs up. John's like, well, where the hell is Cobalt? And throwing a tantrum again, because that's pretty much his only personality trait in this fucking show, is either angry or sad boy. Just terrible. All of this is just stupid. We go to everyone's favorite character, Quan, And again, another world building thing that I just do not fucking understand. She has this tag in her ear, and you can see she's trying to remove it. And they have the indentured servants tagged like humans. And she can literally just yank it out of her ear. And like, yeah, that's not pleasant. You don't want to yank stuff out of your ear. But with all the technology they have, they couldn't just put a chip in her that she can't remove on her own, or it would be extremely risky to remove on her own. Like here we see her with like a knife and pliers, and in a few minutes here, she just straight up pulls it out. Like they're humans, they're not cows. You can't just stick something in their ear and keep track of them that way. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we find out that Quan is an indentured servant to some family, and these bounty hunters are after her to return her to the family that purchased her. Again, this is a pretty big jump from the end of last season where she was supposed to be leading some kind of rebellion, dealing with the witches, dealing with the monitor in the well. So I don't understand any of the world building. They've kind of done the worst of both worlds, where they tried to build on season 1, which was already bad, instead of just throwing it out. But then they kept some stuff from season 1, but then didn't stay consistent with it. So all the bad decisions that they could make, they made. Like they kept these characters that we don't like, they kept the story that no one liked, and they made their story inconsistent with it, but still kind of continued it. I have no idea why this decision was made this way. We see Quan get chased by a few dudes, and obviously she's going to get away. And this is kind of where I say I think the culture war nonsense is slipping into the show again. Obviously, you had the race swaps and stuff that took place during the casting, but that was 3 years ago at this point. Quan is running from these bounty hunters and kills 2 or 3 of them and gets away. But this guy has her on the ground with a knife, and she uses her little tracker that she ripped out to stab him. And I looked it up just out of curiosity. The actress who plays Quan is 5'1", and I'd be shocked if she was even 100 pounds. So this is just ridiculous. And according to the Wikipedia, she's supposed to be 16, so she's a child, just killing grown men bounty hunters. Completely ridiculous in world. It seems like a thing that they needed to fill time and to push nonsense for meta reasons, I'm assuming. We get another scene here where the world building is just thrown out the fucking window at this point. So this guy, Lewis, on the right, was apparently a Spartan washout, and Riz is working out, and he can see that she's uncomfortable or hurt, and he goes to try to help her. And he's blind, and I'm just going to go ahead and say I don't know how a blind person could exist in this world. Unless your face and occipital lobes, or whatever they're called, were completely destroyed. Doesn't make any sense to me. The surgeries that the Spartans went through altered their bones, altered their reflexes, altered their muscle repair, altered their eyesight, obviously altered their strength, their height, everything. So they've gone through all these crazy-ass enhancements. So the fact that they couldn't just replace this guy's eyes, I just don't fucking buy it. Anyway, it's weird because he seems like bitter about the Spartans, but he's also working in the gym, which kind of seems like a safety hazard to me to have the blind guy working in the gym, but whatever. He's talking to Riz, and they do the whole thing. We get the exposition about how he was one of them once and blah, blah, blah. And it's actually not a terrible scene if you don't mind that the world building makes no sense, because he says, my vision was darkening for that time that I was a Spartan, but I didn't say anything because I cared more about being a Spartan than anything else. Which is a decent way to show how much they buy into the fact that they need to be Spartans and that's their purpose. We get more stuff pulled from the lore that the creators just don't understand. Lewis says to Riz, you don't have to go back out there. She says, what, and live a meaningless life? And then she apologizes because he's obviously not a Spartan. He's not bothered by it because he says he used to feel the same way. And then he says, you don't have to do this. And she says that Spartans never die. And the Spartans never die thing is not something that the Spartans really believe, obviously. They do say it, but they only say it in very specific moments because the Spartans never die mythology is promoted by Oni and the UNSC to create these larger-than-life invincible figures to boost morale. So every Spartan is listed as missing in action. They don't say it as some kind of motto to themselves to be like, this is why I have to be a Spartan, and Spartans never die. It's fucking ridiculous. So this is just a misunderstanding of the lore, and really they just don't give a shit, let's face it. And it's just stupid in the show that she would say this when we know that she's seen Spartans die at this point. So what you really get from this scene is just, this guy's a washout, Riz is hurt, and she wants to go get healed in private because she's too embarrassed to ask for help. Which is weird. Another world building issue, I suppose, that Oni wouldn't be all over their health checks, all over their physical fitness, their mental state, and they're just kind of letting them wander and be free, not worried about injuries or anything. And it's also not clear to me how she performed the last mission. Now, she didn't really do much. She just kind of jogged around. But here, she's struggling to work out at all. Like, she can't breathe. He's poking her back, and she's in a lot of pain. So again, this is all stuff that's just kind of contrived with no real attention to detail in the show itself or the lore as a whole. And I know this is more of an editing thing, but it really annoys me John goes to talk to Akerson, and he's like, where's Cobalt? Again, being a dick, disrespectful to a superior. All bullshit inside the world, but at this point, fuck it, that's what the story is. I actually like this part from Akerson in the dialogue, because he says, do you want a drink? And John says, I don't drink. And Akerson sits down and he goes, of course you don't. Do you want something to eat? Do you guys do that? Because the implication is that he views them as Halsey's robots. They're not really human. They're cyborgs that have been bred and created to fight in the war. And he's more old school. Again, would have made sense with a different casting, but I'm not going to keep rehashing that. So I actually do like that little bit of dialogue there, where he's implying that John's a robot without coming out and saying it. And of course, right after I give a little bit of praise to the show, they followed up with more nonsense. John says, put us back in action or I'll find someone who will. Trying to threaten a superior officer. And Akerson goes, I know you like your hierarchy, but make no mistake, the ONI is in charge. And the fact that he doesn't just say ONI instead of the ONI every time is really annoying to me. I could be misremembering, but I don't ever remember anyone saying the ONI at almost any point in the story. They almost always just say ONI every time they're referenced, and they're referenced a lot in the books. And you can hear that in the audiobooks, obviously, not just reading it. We get some terrible dialogue to follow up the decent dialogue, where Akerson says, the ONI is in charge, and I am the ONI. Jesus. Akerson explains to him that his account of Sanctuary can't be verified. Perez gave a different account because she can't remember it. John's pissed off, and Akerson says, if you were me, would you believe you right now, given your recent behavior? Because obviously John's been erratic, and they can't trust him. John says, you need us to win this war, and Akerson agrees, and he's like, but we need the Master Chief. Right now you're just John, who's only a guy in a suit. Kind of a dick thing to say, but also correct with the way they have him acting in this show. And here we get another scene where I said I think the culture war shit is slipping in. Soren's wife is bossing around the pirates, even though as far as I'm aware, and as far as the show is implied, she was kind of a trophy wife for Soren, who's like the pirate king in the rubble. She's like, get his ship ready, we're going to get him. And she's just bossing everybody around, and they're listening because that's what the show wants to happen. Obviously, she's never been on a mission before, she's not a pirate. She's been a stay-at-home trophy wife and mom, and now she's the boss bitch. So that's where we're going with that, it seems like. Quan is back at her little cave thing talking to Soren's son. Soren's son says when my dad comes back, he'll take care of stuff. And Quan yells at him that Soren's not coming back, so the kid runs off. And she feels bad. Don't really give a shit about her plot, so let's just keep going. We go to a training room of some kind with Silver Team. And I don't really understand what the training they're doing is, but Riz is like scaling a cliffside and trying to run away from the other three without getting shot. And they shoot her and she falls down and she's obviously hurt. But John keeps being a dick and pushing, and Kai is like, we should back off. And John's like, no, the Covenant's trained to come invade something big. Again, a super tenuous plot, just kind of haphazardly thrown together. So there's not really much to say about this scene. John just keeps making Riz try over and over. He's pushing really hard. She's obviously hurt. He's supposed to be portrayed as the dick. We go back to Halsey for what amounts to a little bit more filler. She keeps asking the little girl questions about the nice man who keeps sending her in, and the girl doesn't know anything or she can't say anything. Really, this is just a waste of a couple minutes. Nothing really happens. We go back to Riz, who's a little bit nervous about going into physical therapy or whatever, and the guy Lewis is talking about him going blind and how he loved being a Spartan. Again, not really much to say. A lot of this stuff is just kind of filler. It's supposed to be developing character because the whole point of Riz's arc, seemingly, is going to be that she's trying to figure out what to do with her life after she's done being a Spartan. And this kind of stuff is way more interesting in the books when you've spent years in the timeline with the Spartans and they've been on a bunch of different missions. They've almost died a bunch and they've lost people. And they do start to age and get a little bit older and be like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I'm not sure if I can be a Spartan forever or if I need to be. But obviously the show hasn't prepped any of that. They haven't built up to any of that. So this is just kind of detached filler that they want you to feel stuff, but they haven't earned it. We cut, and Akerson is asking Kai about Chief's mental state. She says that he's the best they've got, even though everything's been really hard and he carries a huge burden. Obviously, Akerson is wanting to find some kind of replacement for the Spartans, or maybe keep him out of the field so the Chief doesn't actually get killed. It's not quite clear what he's after right now. And again, I'm not going to keep saying this in every video, but the actor who plays Akerson is 5'11". Kai looks like she's about 6'1". And in the books, the shortest Spartan was Kelly, who was 6'4", 6'5", somewhere in there. She was still almost 7 foot with armor. Master Chief was 6'10". Not really sure why they couldn't have just put her on a step here. Or use forced perspective or whatever, but clearly they're not going to at any point, so I guess I'll just leave it alone. John, very inappropriately, as part of his tantrum, goes to Perez's house and wants to find out why she's lying, and goes and knocks on her door, and the grandmother invites John in for dinner. Riz goes and does her holistic therapy shit, and she's like, what is that? And the guy's like, oh, it's your pain, just let it go. And I guess it's supposed to be a mental thing. It's not very clear to me, again, what's happening here, because they briefly introduced magic in the last season. I don't know if we're supposed to believe that this guy's holistic healing is actually magic, or if this is more just some kind of therapy to help Riz mentally unblock herself or whatever. Again, a lot of filler, not stuff that I don't think anyone cares about, really. I sure as hell don't. We're back to John and Perez's dinner. I'm not sure how he found her, by the way, but whatever. They sit down for dinner, and then once again, the guys are dicks. They start asking John about his KDR, which I cannot imagine that there's someone that's a big enough prick to ask veterans who've seen combat about their fucking KDR, especially given that his relative was the lone survivor in the mission that she just got back from. So I find this scene unbelievable, and again, more just kind of filler, at least until John actually talks to Perez, which they probably could have cut to that and skipped this whole dinner scene, but I'm sure they wanted the minutes watched on Paramount Plus. This conversation ends up being kind of pointless. She just explains that the comms went down, they heard some kind of signal, and then everyone died. And we already knew that. And John had already kind of said that repeatedly last episode. She essentially has survivor's guilt, and that's why she didn't tell Akerson the whole story, because she doesn't know why they didn't kill her. And again, they're breaking their own story and the lore, where the Covenant slaughter every man, woman, and child down to the last kid. We saw them do it to start season 1, and they just let her go and let John go inexplicably to start this season. And they have a little conversation about her guilt, and she asks if it gets easier, and John just says no, it gets further away. This is one of those lines that sounds good. I'm not sure how much sense it makes, because in the sense that when you lose someone close to you, and the further away it gets in time is what makes it more manageable to deal with. Maybe easier isn't the right word, but obviously somebody who grieves when they immediately lose someone is completely different in their grief a few days later and a few months later and a few years later. So it's one of those lines that I think probably sounds smart. And then if you think about it, you're kind of like, meh, whatever. We go back to Halsey. Akerson finally reveals that it's him who keeps sending the clones in. And she talks about this tree in the background that's been mentioned a couple times. And she tells this whole story about when she was a kid and it was her dad's and she used to cultivate it. And then eventually she burned it down because she thought it was beneath her to take care of it. And she's never told anybody that story. So obviously the implication is that Akerson has Cortana now. Because Halsey used her own clone to create Cortana, Cortana is the only one that has that memory. And this is frustrating because Halsey says, "What do you want from me?" And Akerson says, "I want to introduce you to someone." And it's another Flash clone. And the tree catches fire. And it's a hologram room, so it's not a big deal. But it seems like they're just going for the Akerson is pure evil route instead of anything interesting here. Would have been really nice if he had been like, "Hey, if you work for me, maybe we can let you out of here sometime," and blah, blah, blah. But no, he's just really evil for the sake of being evil, I guess. And on top of this, he says that Cortana's secure, she's locked up. And this is a bit frustrating to me because Cortana's design was explicitly to be the best AI, to be able to break down security defenses and cyber networks and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that the UNSC is containing her and she's not running rampant through their systems, I also find a bit meh, lore-wise and story-wise. Cortana obviously is a bastardized version of what she should be anyway, so they must have gotten the Halo 5 version. Akerson goes and looks at the Forerunner artifact from last season. John goes and says, "Show me the flight plan for Cobalt's mission." Again, not sure why all this stuff wouldn't be sectioned off and he would have access to it, but whatever. And he realizes that they never left Reach, is the long and short of it. Akerson goes and talks to Cortana. He's asking about the simulations. And the implication here is that Reach is going to fall. And he's the only one that knows, along with Cortana, who he's keeping secret right now. They don't ever say it outright, but that's what you're supposed to put together here from the different pieces of the conversation. John finding out that Cobalt never left Reach, and then they haven't communicated since. Cortana says there's a 97% chance that Covenant is going to invade Reach, and that in all of her simulations, the outcome doesn't change no matter what. So essentially, Reach is going to fall no matter what, and this might be why Akerson is trying to preserve Silver Team, because there's no point in throwing them into a losing battle just to sacrifice them. But we don't know that yet. John takes his team, and instead of going to train, he tells them they're going to find Cobalt. Again, no clue how he has the ability to do this, why he's able to go rogue, his personality, and why he would go rogue. Of course, that started last season, like episode 1, so his character has been shit on in that regard from the beginning. I still think it's stupid to have a guy who grew up purely military, brainwashed military, to just go rogue whenever he feels like and be a total dick all the time, but whatever. They're going to find Cobalt, and we're going to see, presumably, that the Covenant is invading Reach. And I don't really understand the logistics here of how the Covenant can knock down comms, especially on Reach, which is the second most important planet after Earth. Reach is the most important planet, which is why the first book is such a big deal, because they didn't think that Reach could fall. None of that's really been explained here. But yeah, I just don't understand how the Covenant is just sneaking onto the planet. No one noticed. They're taking down comms. No one's noticed. Everyone's just like, oh, send a Spartan team out that also disappeared. It's cool. Kai asks John if they're cleared for combat, and he says, yep, which is fine. I kind of would have liked if he said no, and they would have said, okay, we're with you anyway. And that's something that also is literally straight from the games, where when John finally does start to do his own thing way down the road in Halo 5, Blue Team is just like, of course we're not going to leave you alone, Chief, because their bond is that strong. And the show just kind of skirts around that and makes John dishonest. We're getting close to the end of the episode here. You can see we're at Reach, and that says Sword Base. Another name that they just pulled out of their ass. I'm not expecting Sword Base to matter for the show the way that it did in the games or the book, but they took the name at least. And these guys go down the hall 4 at a time, shooting and just keep dying. Don't really understand any of this. Logistically, I don't really understand it. Like, we don't see the Elite's shields flare. We don't really see what happens. They just kind of cut away and then they're all dead and there's no more gunfire. Don't know why they don't have motion detectors. Don't know why they don't have flashlights. Don't know why they don't have fucking alarms if their base is being broken into. Not sure why this part of the base would be completely dark. But, they wanted to go for the horror aspect, so I guess they got it. And once again, I don't understand what's happening. You might have thought Makee was a PTSD vision. She's back, or a clone of her or something. Maybe we'll get a cool line like, somehow Makee returned. Either way, I can't believe they brought her back. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that they can claim it's a different show and they've redirected. It's all the same shit. They brought back all the same characters, soft reset their plot lines, and they're still dog shit, and they're still uninteresting. And she is at this important artifact. That's the end of the episode. So yeah, this one was an absolute slog. The world building was glassed, worse than Reach is about to be. The show's just bad. The writing's not good. It's boring. The world building is atrocious. They don't understand the lore other than yanking names from places and people. So it's just terrible. I guess we'll see what happens in episode 3. I'm not expecting much. The one that people keep hyping up is episode 4. I am not optimistic. I'm assuming that this is going to be the fall of Reach, but I don't really know. And the fall of Reach presumably is going to last the whole season if they make Sword Base important and all that kind of stuff. But who knows with the way this show's been handled. It's actually hard for me to even guess the direction that it's going because the writing is so all over the place and there's really not much that makes sense. And the characters are so erratic. This went long again, so I'm going to cut it off here. Let me know what you think and I'll respond. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.